Christmas Day, Beryl and my good self usually make a point of having a few folk round for the midday dinner. It's only once a year, so we like to go to a certain amount of trouble. Beryl could go on cooking till the cows come home, and as she always says, she doesn't mind how much she cooks as long as people eat it up. Waste not, want not, as they say in the classics. Anyway, last year she went crazy. My wife is known for her puff pastry, and she turned out a batch of 5 dozen little mince pies and one big one to keep her hand in. She always gets her plum pudding over and done with early in the piece these days too, ever since the year she fell in. I did my bit too, boiling the sixpences. Wouldn't want the kiddies to get tummy trouble, but my main department was the tree and the decorations, etc. We always get our tree from Bob May, a very, very nice chappie I know who runs his conveyance up to the Dandies at night every Christmas and procures them from one of the new reforestation plantations in the vicinity of the Sylvan Dam. Naturally, I don't quibble, I just say thank you very much and leave it at that. Mind you, if I'd known where he got them, it'd be an entirely different proposition altogether. Anyway, by the time I'd finished with it, the tree looked like fairyland. I put about 4 or 5 bricks in the jardiniere to keep it firm so the cotton wool wouldn't fall off, and we kept the Venetians well closed to stop the blessed thing drooping all over the shop before the big day. Pine needles, play, old Nick with Beryl's appliance. Our dining room table is very deceptive, and it seats quite a fair complement with the leaf in, so we took the opportunity of inviting Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, Clive and Valda Clissold, and the Nettleton couple with their 2 delightful kiddies, Wayne and Marilyn, making 8, counting Beryl and my good self. Beryl said the kiddies could sit at the bridge table and have their own little Christmas dinner. Well, on Christmas morning it looked as though we were in for a real scorcher. So Beryl got up early to pit the dates and do the stuffing before it got too hot to do a hand's turn. I toddled off to communion at Holy Trinity, and the Reverend Polkinghorn, a very go-ahead young chappie, told the menfolk they could take their coats off if they were so desirous of doing so. He said he was sorry there weren't any bells this year, but apparently the Louisa Hutchinson Memorial loudspeaker system was on the blink. When I got back from church, Beryl had given the home a good going over with the fly tocks, so he wouldn't have to race the blowies to our dinner, and she'd even looked out her precious Cries of London dinner mats. I tried on my Father Christmas costume again, but I still had a certain amount of strife with the beard. Beryl had made it herself with pipe cleaners and cotton wool stitched onto one of her old surgical stockings, but the blessed thing kept slipping off one of my ears and coming away at the side, so that somehow it didn't look real. However, Beryl said when the time came she'd do something with a band-aid. Well, the people started arriving before we knew where we were, so I handed round the mince pies and a drop of sherry for those who partook. We didn't go to the fag of serving the sherries with an olive on a toothpick because it isn't everyone's cup of tea. Besides, Beryl's found the vast majority are just as happy with a pickled onion. Valda Clissold said she liked sherry, but that sherry didn't like her. And I must say the lass looked rather on the peaky side. Beryl said later she thought her whites were very discoloured. Apparently, she'd been a bit car-sick on the way over. She'd always had that trouble, and they've tried everything. Buicks, Chevrolets, Fords, Toyotas, Holdens, the lot. But Clive is still very pushed getting her to the nature strip in time. Alan and Elaine Hotchkiss popped in unexpectedly for a few minutes with some presents, and Beryl slipped into the bedroom and wrapped up some bath salts and aftershave lotion so they would never have known. Alan's quite an identity in the sporting sphere. He's the pro at the Yarradale Golf Club, and he told me that latterly he'd been placed in an exceptionally embarrassing position. Apparently, he'd been down at the junction the other day and he'd run into Dave Cohen, who owns Miss Greta Gowns of Caulfield, Camberwell and Clayton. Anyway, Coey asked Alan if he could pull a few strings and get him into the golf club. Oh, dearie me. Now, we've all known Coey for donkey's years. As a matter of fact, Beryl and I can remember when they came over here before the war without a razoo, and they couldn't hardly speak the King's English. Not that they tried that hard. He's a very fair chappie, but Beryl said looking at her you could pick it. Not that I hold that against them. Heavens alive, it's a free country, and what's the old saying? If you shake your family tree, one's bound to fall out. And there's no gainsaying they produce a wonderful people, scientists, etc. Still, he put Alan Hotchkiss in a beggar of a position. I mean, as Alan said to me, if you let one in, you've got to let the rest in, and before you know where you are, they're running the whole blessed show. Personally speaking, I wouldn't have any objection if they started up their own golf club. It's not that they're that short. And as Beryl said the other day, and it's so true, have you ever seen a poor one? Well, Alan got out of it somehow, but he reckoned that kind of thing always happens when you get too pally. Give 'em an inch and they take a mile. Anyway, when the Hotchkisses had vamoosed, the wife said, "Dinner's ready when you are," so I turned on the fairy lights. To cut a long story short, they fused everything in the place, including the new eye-level roast master. So by the time the men folk had fiddled round with the fuse box, we didn't sit down till 4:15, and the turkey was as tough as old Nick. It never rains, but it pours. On top of that, I couldn't get the pudding to light, and when it finally did, the plastic holly melted, giving it a rather funny taste. And I, Simpson, said it was luscious all the same, and anyway, it was really the thought that counted. After the roast, I noticed that Beryl gave Mrs. Simpson a big second helping of potatoes and dicky bird, even though she said she'd had an elegant sufficiency. Later on, Beryl told me she'd only done it because on the odd occasion we've eaten at their place, Vi Simpson was a bit of an Ikey-mo. On top of the pudding, Beryl had made a delicious fruit salad, which she'd put in the big cut crystal bowl she keeps for best. She's had it for years now, but it's still got the dunkling sticker on it. However, everyone was full up to Dolly's wax, and I was absolutely stonkered. So unfortunately, it was hardly touched, and Beryl said it was a wicked shame after all the fags she'd gone to, with the exception of the banana, which goes brown overnight. She'd preserved every bit of that fruit herself in her Fowler's Vicola, and I can vouch for it personally. Beryl's been bottling all her married life. The crackers were a bit of a disappointment, though. There's not the workmanship in a cracker like there used to be, and we got them all screwed up trying to make them go bang. Clive Clissold said there was a special way of holding them, but in the end we had to take the strips of cardboard out and pull them, which isn't quite the same. My joke was Q. When is a door not a door? A. When it's a jar, which is terrifically funny because I got exactly the same joke last year. Beryl said she hadn't seen the joke that the Prescott couple got, but she thought it might have been a bit questionable. Then the wife passed round her homemade hedgehog and Turkish delight, but Val de Clissold said thanks all the same, but she'd leave it for Mr. Manners. I slipped into the bedroom and got into my Father Christmas get-up. And when I came out, I was the cynosure of all eyes. You should have seen the expression on young Wayne and Marilyn. They thought I was just Christmas. Well, I gave out all the presents and Beryl and I did very nicely, thank you. Although Beryl said later she was pretty positive the talc Vi Simpson gave her was wrapped in the same paper she'd wrapped Vi's present in last year. Beryl is now a member of the ladies section of the Glen Iris RSL and Citizens Bowling Club, and I gave her a beautiful bowls box with 2 bowls, which the chappie at the sports depot said I could change because I wasn't sure of her bias. It was a lovely thing in polished Tasmanian hardwood. Actually, it was really a piece of furniture. She gave me a box of initialed pyramid hankies, which were very much appreciated. Beryl's quite right when she says I'm very hard to buy for. Be that as it may, Wayne and Marilyn, bless their little hearts, had a very good innings at the dinner table. So we sent them onto the back lawn with their presents, and the poor little devils wanted to hop into their togs then and there and play under the sprinkler. But their mother put her foot down and told them they weren't to go near water until their dinner settled. Beryl passed round her own homemade date and cashew fudge, and we all sat down in front of the instrument and watched the Queen's speech and the bushfire warnings. Then I thought we all ought to get together and tell a few ghost stories around the electric fan. But nobody knew any. Beryl said something funny had once happened to her when she was a toddler, but she couldn't remember what. Soon people had to be going, and as there was still a great swag of perfectly good tucker going begging, Beryl made up a little parcel for the Nettletons to drop into the Louisa Hutchinson home for handicapped kiddies on their way home. They'd only put it down in the drive for a few minutes to gather up the small fry, and Clive Clissold backed his Packard right over the blessed lot. Still, what the eye don't see, the heart doesn't grieve over, as they say in the classics. But 6:20, they'd all gone to their respective homes, and I told Beryl to toddle off to bed and get a bit of shut-eye, or she'd be an absolute cot case on Boxing Day. I potted round for a bit, cleaning the place up so that Beryl wouldn't have to face it in the morning, but to tell you the truth, I felt like a wet rag. A very hot north wind had blown up again, and I could hear people laughing way off up at the Jeffries place. It rattled the Venetians and blew the majority of the cards off the mantelpiece. It's funny, you know. We didn't get nearly as many cards back last year, and it was the first time Beryl could remember Barry and Shirley Bedgegood missing. I knew that latterly they'd had their fair share of bereavement, but as Beryl said, things are never so bad you can't put pen to paper. You'd be amazed the number of friends who sent us the same UNICEF card we sent them. Wouldn't you think people would have a bit more imagination? When I got into the cot and switched off the bed lamp, Beryl started to talk in her sleep. I suppose it was exhaustion, plus all that rich food, but she was crying and rambling on quite clearly, and I think she reckoned it was Christmas and she was a nipper. I thought we'd have a good old laugh about it the next morning, but when I woke up, I'd forgotten the blessed lot. When I told Beryl, she said she'd slept like a log and not to talk a lot of twaddle. It's funny though, isn't it? The way you can't remember your dreams.